good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Friday night Bible study for the 14th day of May, 2021 on the pagan Roman calendar. And this is now the 5th day of the 3rd month on God's holy sacred calendar. And we've got a new mixer in the studio with us. And even though I pulled the volume down on our opening music, it's coming through in the studio speakers, and I'm sure the microphone is picking up the studio speakers, because the studio speakers are up a little bit loud, much louder than normal, and so I know the mic is picking that up, so I'm maybe fighting with the music here until we can, they're about to wrap that off. Okay, or I can just cut it off right there. Let me do that to say Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to a very special double Sabbath weekend. Starts out with a regular weekly Sabbath and immediately followed at sunset at the end of the day by the annual Sabbath of Pentecost this year. We've been counting that down for the past 7 weeks and talking about it coming up, and in fact on the calendar for this year, 2021, the pagan Roman calendar, where we interposed the Hebrew calendar into it so we can live with it. Up there on the top row, we've got where Passover started on March 28th this year. March 27 was Passover in the month of March. Yeah, March 27, in the month of March on the Roman calendar. And then the day following Passover, the first day of unleavened bread, was on the 28th of March, and that also was the wave sheaf day, because when Passover is on a weekly Sabbath, that's the triggering Sabbath for the day after the Sabbath during Passover unleavened bread, that begins the count with day 1 as wave sheaf day. Wave sheaf day is day 1 through day 7 for the first week, and we do that 7 times through day 49 for all 7 weeks that have to be complete. And then the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, after day number 49, the morrow after day 49, day 50, God says, keep the holy day. Bring your offering, keep the holy day. Don't wait another day and keep it on day 51. That's crazy. That's few men's guys in New York, you're going to have to excuse me on this one, but there is such a thing as lunatic reasoning that some men are evilly doing, setting themselves up as the authority when God tells us how to do it in the book of Leviticus. Verse 23, verse 15 says 7 Sabbaths must be complete. Or is it verse 16? Verse 15 or 16 says, my Bible's down here on the floor. Will you let me take a nose dive for it? I'm going to grab my Bible. And we've got scriptures on the scripture display already set for tonight's telecast with Mr. Armstrong. Very special telecast we have tonight that relates to this upcoming annual holy day. And I'll tell you how in just a moment. But first, let's flip over. If you want to flip with me, I'm going to Leviticus 23. We've gone to this chapter and these 2 verses in verses 15 and 16 a lot these past 7 weeks, and part of the reason for that is because just like God said in Revelation 12 verse 9 that the devil has the whole world deceived. There were even people among us who God says they were in our midst, but they really weren't of us, who, when God corrected us for the 2nd time over how to count Pentecost, well, 2nd time, I thought he only corrected that 1 time, Stephen, in 1974. Well, you need to do your homework on the history, if that's what you think, because in 1940, oh, you weren't around then, were you? God started this work with his end-time apostle Herbert W. Armstrong, back in 1920. Well, he started working with Mr. Armstrong in 1926 and testing him and allowing him to work with the Sardis era those years while God was testing him. And then when God began the Philadelphia era, as an era in 1933, Mr. Armstrong continued to serve the Sardis brethren, and those among them who would submit to the understanding that God gave us through Mr. Armstrong, that we should not only be keeping the weekly Sabbaths, but the annual Sabbaths as well. Those people came on into the Philadelphia era. Some stayed among Sardis with an attitude of, yeah, well, we can keep them annual holy days if we want to, but we don't have to do that, So just once in a while, we'll see if we can come meet up with y'all, and make havoc out of our meetings while you say, oh, we can do this if we want to, but we don't have to. Excuse me. But God says, I think the fourth commandment is just that, isn't it? A commandment that we keep the Sabbaths. And when Mr. Armstrong learned, as he studied the original text of Colossians 2, it means not only is the weekly Sabbath not done away with, but honey, as he told his wife Loma, we have to keep the annual Sabbaths as well. They rise or fall together. It's one or the other. We keep the Sabbaths, weekly and annual, or none of it. And Mr. Armstrong found, to his wife's delight, and quite a reward for him, as he proved by his fruits that he would obey God, and that God nurtured him, brought him along, continued to correct him. And that first correction I was mentioning was in 1940, where Mr. Armstrong had been keeping Pentecost according to the way certain Jewish cults, most of them, count it, even today, to this day, they count it from the annual Sabbath of the first day of unleavened bread. But in 1940, God corrected Mr. Armstrong to understand, you're not really counting it if you're keeping it on the sixth day of the third month every year, which is the way it comes out. If you count it one time from the first day of unleavened bread, from an annual Sabbath, the first annual Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread, it's always going to come out the sixth day of the third month. So God might as well have put that down in Leviticus 23. All right, on the sixth day of the third month, you keep Pentecost. No, he said you got to count it. And he said, according to the instruction of when you came in, verse 11 of Leviticus 23 and elsewhere in the Bible, helped Mr. Armstrong to understand God's correction that you got to count it from the weekly Sabbath, not the annual Sabbath. So God gave that instruction to Mr. Armstrong in 1940, after Mr. Armstrong had observed Pentecost according to the Jewish way of counting it, from the first day of unleavened bread. He did that from the spring of 1927 through the spring of 1939. And he almost did it in the spring of 1940, had it scheduled for the church members in 1940 on the third day of the sixth month, and then suddenly sent out a notice saying, whoop, we're going to change this from, what was it that year? June 12, I think, would have been, or June 17. They flipped it around one or the other so that it came out to be on the 50th day counted from the weekly Sabbath. And yeah, you can use from in that verbiage. If you're saying you're counting it from something, you're counting it from the weekly Sabbath. You don't number the weekly Sabbath. That's day 0. That's the target Sabbath. That's the Sabbath from which the day following that Sabbath is the wave sheaf day, and that's day number 1 of the 50-day count. You count beginning with the morrow after the weekly Sabbath, between Passover and days of unleavened bread, the Sabbath that falls from either on Passover or during the days of unleavened bread up to the 6th day of unleavened bread. And then that Sabbath that falls in that period of time triggers the wave sheaf day, the day following that, which this year, because Passover occurred on a Sabbath day, a weekly Sabbath, March 27, making the wave sheaf day Sunday, March 28th. And it doesn't always work out this way. It doesn't always work out that the Wave Sheaf Day and the first day of unleavened bread are the same day. But this year it was. It did work out that way. And therefore, counting Wave Sheaf Day as day 1, day 50 comes out to be tomorrow at sunset at the end of this Sabbath. All right, we've been going through that all 7 weeks that we've been counting since Pentecost, a lot. We've been going through that. But the point I wanted to emphasize tonight is the fact that God corrected Mr. Armstrong the first time about Pentecost in 1940. And just a week or so before when Pentecost in 1940, God corrected Mr. Armstrong to understand you got to count this from the weekly Sabbath, not from the annual Sabbath. And so, what else was I going to tell you about that? Well, we've got Sabbath morning, and then we can even talk about this on Pentecost itself. We're going to have a double Sabbath on Pentecost. We'll have a Sabbath in the morning, and we'll have a service in the morning on the Sabbath. Tonight is Bible study, and so let's and that's when we maybe do more detail on things. We're at this point on the Roman calendar where we interpose the Hebrew with it, where we're now. Listen, let me highlight that 15th where we are tonight. Tonight we're as of midnight tonight, because of the Roman calendar, the way we have to say it related to the Roman calendar, the way man changes days at midnight instead of the way God does it at sunset, we're already at the Sabbath. We're already in the Sabbath where I am. The sun has set, but it's the 14th. It looks like Friday on the Roman calendar. Well, it is Friday till midnight, and Friday night after sunset is already the Sabbath. And you got to mention 2 dates on the Roman calendar. It's very confusing because this is really just one day with God from sunset to sunset. It's the Sabbath, and it's the 5th day of the 3rd month. And this year, are we keeping it the same day the Jewish people are? Yeah, because the Wave Sheaf Day and the first day of unleavened bread are the same this year. Normally, for the Jewish people, the way because they count from the annual Sabbath, and they do the Wave Sheaf Day the day after the annual Sabbath. Oh, wait a second. That means this year the Jewish people are going to be keeping Pentecost up on the day that the people in Oregon who still keep Pentecost on Monday keep it, because even though, let's see, the annual day of the first day of unleavened bread this year was Sunday, the Wave Sheaf Day. It was, if we back that calendar up for a moment, let me see that. Where the red is on March is Passover. The day before that, the pink is the evening of the foot washing. The day after that, March 28th, the first day of unleavened bread, the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. All right, after God corrected Mr. Armstrong, we've got it this year so that the morrow after the weekly Sabbath is also the first day of unleavened bread. So we're counting day 1, Wave Sheaf Day. Now the Jewish people, the way Mr. Armstrong was keeping it with the Jewish people between 1927 and 1939, his first 13 years, the Jewish people, since they count from the annual Sabbath, the morrow after the annual Sabbath, the Jewish people kept the Wave Sheaf Day this year on the 29th day of March. So they started their count on the 29th day of March. So they're going to come up with day 50 on a Monday, this coming Monday. And that'll be the 6th day of the 3rd month. Now that's interesting, because the Jewish people who do it that way, they still call that day, day 50. And that Monday, this coming Monday, as day 50 for the Jewish people, is day number 50, counting with the Wave Sheaf Day from March 29, with a Wave Sheaf Day of March 29, because they do the Wave Sheaf Day the morrow after the annual Sabbath. However, when you do it correctly, this year, the annual Sabbath of March 28 is also the Wave Sheaf Day, not the next day, but the Wave Sheaf Day is also the first day of unleavened bread this year, when you count it correctly, because Passover was on a weekly Sabbath. That made the next day the first day of unleavened bread, and since the day following the weekly Sabbath is the Wave Sheaf Day, that made the first day of unleavened bread and the Wave Sheaf Day the same. Well, the Jewish people counting the Wave Sheaf Day as the morrow after the annual Sabbath, they disregard when the weekly Sabbath is during Passover unleavened bread. And so Passover falling on the weekly Sabbath, first day of unleavened bread falling on a Sunday this year, and since the Jewish people count from the annual day of the first day of unleavened bread, the Wave Sheaf Day for them was the morrow after the Wave Sheaf Day, or Monday, this year. It moves around for the Jewish people. It can be one of 4 days of the week. And I know I'm beating that subject to death without a chart up on the spreadsheet, like, to really point it out so you can really grab it in your head. Some of you got it already, and you're right with me. But if you don't have it, you may be sitting there saying, boy, this is a deep, fuzzy, hard subject. But let's just read a couple of verses. I was going to verses 15 and 16 in Leviticus 23. You know, and this applies because after sunset, it either correctly becomes the Pentecost, or you're going to be following the Jewish people and waiting a whole nother day, or you're going to be following those people in Oregon who don't do it the way the Jewish people do, but they still are winding up this year on the same day because they counted out to day 51. And they want to follow what we originally did from the time God called Mr. Armstrong. Well, I'm sorry, folks. Mr. Armstrong never counted it out to day 51. No, I'm not going to apologize. I'm not sorry about that. The truth is, the truth, folks, is Mr. Armstrong never counted to day 51. Our misunderstanding is when to start the day one count, but we counted to day 50. Once God straightened us out on when to start the count, you people lined up with that because of you, Mr. Clark, Howard Clark, coming over with you, who taught you about Men's Shabbat, and that did not that part of his teaching did not contradict or conflict with the correction God gave us to do Men's Shabbat, to do counting inclusive, the way the Hebrew grammar is on it, to count inclusive, meaning you can start the count with the Wave Sheaf Day as day number 1. So once God corrected us to that, then day 50 came out on the first day of the week, tomorrow after the 7th Sabbath day, just like it's worded in Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16. But no, the people that say, no, we got to stay on Monday, we got to stay with original teaching. But then if you really read what they say to you, they're telling you to count to day 51. We never did that. We never counted to day 51. What we were originally doing was counting from the annual Sabbath the way the Jewish people still do it today. And so if you're listening to these people out on Monday, they're throwing all kind of dust and smoke in the air and creating all kind of confusion, saying, we've got to keep it the way we originally kept it. Well, the way we originally kept it would be counting from the annual Sabbath. The Jewish people still do that. And y'all don't do that. This year you just happen to come out the same day, comes out the same day, but you're calling it day 51. Jewish people still call it day 50. The confusion of fighting the truth of God. Well, let's look at it. It's right here in these two verses. Starting with verse 15 of Leviticus 23. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, and the word is Shabbat, not Shavua or Shabua. There is a Hebrew word for week, So you can't say this is an idiomatic expression, meaning you can move the week around anywhere you want it to be, starting, instead of with a Sunday, you start the week with a Monday. No, you can't, because God says you got to end it on the Sabbath day. He says, count to you unto the morrow after the, well, when we get to verse 16, you'll see where that applies. You shall count unto you from the morrow after the Shabbat, the Sabbath day, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths. Shabbats, not Shabuah, but Shabbats shall be complete. 7 weeks of first day of the week through seventh day, Sunday through Sabbath, Sunday through Saturday Sabbaths, shall be complete. That's 7 times 7. That's 49 days that must be complete. And then God says in verse 16, now he's bringing number 50 into it. After the 49 days are complete, 7 weeks total 49 days. But then Pentecost is a separate day, the day following the 7th Sabbath. Verse 16, count unto you unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number as day number 50, 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto the Eternal that day. To do this otherwise is to add to the book, or to try to change Acts 2:1 the way Thomas Cranmer changed it in contradiction of the original text, is bringing a curse upon people. As God says, don't add to or subtract from my word. All right, we covered that. I'll probably try to get a chart up here and cover it where you can understand it a little bit easier. But back to this calendar part for just a moment. We're tonight, the 14th, at midnight it's the 15th. From sunset, it's actually already this 7th Sabbath of 7 weeks of Sunday through Sabbath day, first day through Sabbath day weeks we've been counting, beginning back there on the wave sheaf day on March 28, which would fill into the top area of April, where it's blank up here, where you start with March 28, Sunday, March 28, and the end of that week is 7 days, the first week. And then count down 7 weeks, we wind up here where we are as of sunset tonight, but it's got to say it different because of this Roman calendar changing the date at midnight. Here we are on the 7th Sabbath. Its circle is May 15 here, and at the end of this Sabbath, May 15, at sunset, it becomes Pentecost. From sunset at the end of the Sabbath through sunset, May 16 is Pentecost Day. All right, so that makes this a double Sabbath. Hope you did double preparation to be all ready for a back-to-back Sabbath. Weekly, starting with a weekly Sabbath, immediately followed at sunset at the end of the weekly Sabbath by the annual Sabbath of Pentecost. Okay, now that I beat that to pieces, here's from our calendar page on cogtv.org. Here's a page where we reference, we've passed the second Passover. We're now coming up at sunset at the end of this day on Pentecost for May 16 this year, Pentecost. We'll have a double service on Sunday at 10:30 in the morning and then again at 3:30 in the afternoon. And we'll make that 2:30 in the afternoon. And then the next day, holy day after that will be trumpets in September. On September 7 begins the evening before September 6 for the Feast of Trumpets. Okay, tonight, and I'm tempted to give a phone call in return and just see how the fellows in California are doing. They tried to call me before we came on the air. Now, normally I wouldn't do this, but I think with Dane and Jacob, I may be able to, this may work out okay. There may be a little delay, from the time we go live to the time you are able to pick it up. There may be 10 or sometimes even up to 30 seconds or 60 seconds from the time I'm speaking till the time you hear me, even though it's live. But I'm going to take a little risk here, and we're just going to check in on Dane, host, and his son Jacob, and see how they're doing. we're coming out a few minutes late tonight, so they either discovered that I'm late and are hearing us live, or they maybe, since I wasn't here for us on time, they may have gone somewhere else.
To an automatic voice message system.
Okay, all right. I got their voicemail, so I'm not going to leave a voicemail. I'll talk to Dane and Jacob later. Let's keep them in our prayers. He's probably calling me right back, I'll bet you. Yep, that looks like... Hey, hello, Dane, Jacob.
Good.
Hey, I don't know if you're watching live, but we are live at the moment, and I saw your call come in just before we went live, and I figured, okay, you were trying to figure out where I was, I guess, and with new equipment,
Yeah.
I had all kind of problems tonight, but I want to know how you guys are doing. How are you and Jacob?
This is Jacob, actually.
Oh, well, Jacob, hello there.
Yeah, how you doing?
Well, I had
You
quite...
doing, Mr. Gilbert?
I had quite a week, but be that as it may, I'm very happy the Sabbath has arrived, and I hope you fellows are too.
I'm so happy. I'm so thankful for it. It's unreal.
Well, you mean this week in particular? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk at the same time you were there, Jacob. You're very happy the Sabbath is here more than usual this weekend?
Oh, very much.
Mm-hmm.
Very much.
And well, we got a double Sabbath coming up. The following this.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Pentecost.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is your dad recovering from that fall he had? All right, Dane. Jacob, from what you can see.
It's hard to explain. He's in Walmart for a minute. He went in there to grab some zero drinks and a few things.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, his fall, his side, I don't well, I think it has something to do with his. Have you ever? Let me ask you a question first before I.
Sure.
Before I answer that question.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of it? Have you ever heard of a dad?
Have you ever heard of a what's the word you're saying?
A dad in the Bible?
Are you talking about like a father, a dad, a D-A-D, dad?
Yeah, a dad, but being not necessarily. I mean, a dad. Have you ever heard of? Does the Scripture give? Does the Scripture give Scripture of a dad as being just one of the brethren?
I'm not sure if I fully am following your question. It does make me think of when one of our instructors at Ambassador College was teaching us about how the word for father, Abba, means like a daddy or a dad, and we were encouraged to, when we pray, to think of him in an intimate way as, hey, Daddy, Abba, loving father, Daddy. If you do a little study on the original words, and I think one of them is Abba. I'm going to need to look at that. But Jacob, let me get back on the wire with you during the regular weekly Sabbath, during the daytime tomorrow, if you don't mind. Because we're live right now, and I want to get as quickly as I can to Mr. Armstrong, because with this double Sabbath, I don't want to keep people up too long tonight. But can we get back together after my morning service?
Yeah, we can.
All right,
yeah,
good.
Yeah, just give us a call, and because then my dad will be out of the Walmart. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll dial you up after the morning service and try to catch you both tomorrow.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds.
Thanks for calling me back, Jacob.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, and I'm going to hang up. We're about to roll into Mr. Armstrong with the telecast we're going to play tonight. So happy Sabbath. Talk to you and Dane in the morning. Okay. All right, good. I appreciate Jacob calling me back. He got into a subject that, we've gone into that before. And I think I know where he's coming from, but it'll give me a chance to look up a few original Greek words and Hebrew words and be able to go over that with him and maybe Dane also. But let's go where we're going to go tonight with a telecast. All right, there's some of the brethren. Where did I park that telecast? I think to find Dane's picture, I went past it. Okay. Just to mention to you, I'm working with some fellows. They're going to, if we can come up with the music for When the Saints Go Marching In, the tune that Graham Davies wanted everybody to sing at his funeral and not mourn over him because he's looking forward to when Christ returns. And then once I found some of that music, I've started. You probably noticed I use it as an opening and a closing. I use a real jazzy one for opening. I use a more melodic, maybe more reverent version of When the Saints Go Marching In when we close out each evening. All right, Mr. Armstrong is going to be asking and answering the question tonight. I should tell you first why I selected this one. Not only is it in the bank of the telecast that we're showing in a certain chronological order from 1984, although I did move this one up just a little bit because of Pentecost. And he asks and answers a question that relates to Pentecost, and he mentions when the church started, when Christ started the church in AD 31. And it was technically the starting date for the church was the day that he poured out his Holy Spirit on Pentecost. Now, I'd like you to pay attention, and Mr. Armstrong's going to say this during this telecast, when the big false church started. He's going to mention the year that the big false church started that relates to what Christ inspired the Apostle John from the vision that they gave him while he was on the Isle of Patmos, and to write down in Revelation 12, verse 9, where it mentions the devil being cast, that old varmint devil, the old snake, the old serpent and great dragon, who is known as the devil and Satan, who deceiveth the whole world. Let me read that so we get it straight. Verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives a few people here and a few people there. No, who, as the verse actually says, who deceives the whole world. He was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He deceives the whole world, as Mr. Armstrong has explained, by having started a great world religion. And that world religion also helped create the Book of Islam and a religion that sprang from that. And he mentions the year that that great false church was started. And it was just a few years after God started the true church of the New Testament church. Not the congregation of ancient Israel, but the true New Testament church, which most of you know, and you're going to hear Mr. Armstrong repeat it and say it, AD 31. And so at sunset at the end of the Sabbath, we'll be commemorating the beginning of the Church of God. And as Mr. Armstrong will explain, most of you know this already, but you'll see him pop the scriptures up on the screen that relate to the 7 eras of the church. Now, he uses a different term along with eras to say 7 epochs, or 7 periods of time periods for different church periods of time, 7 eras. We're in that 6th era, as Mr. Armstrong has explained. The 7th era will not start until the 5th seal opens up and until those who are accounted worthy to escape have gotten into their place of protection. Then when the devil, verse 17 of Revelation 12, goes after the remnant, those who are left behind, then the era of martyrdom during the Great Tribulation begins as the Laodicean era. Yeah, attitudes here big time. It was even here big time while Mr. Armstrong was yet alive. He'd pound on his lectern and say, "Brethren, wake up! 90% of you aren't getting it." He finally said, started out with 50% of you aren't getting it, then he upped the ante to 90%. But we're celebrating the commemoration, the beginning of the New Testament church that began on Pentecost in AD 31. We'll be celebrating that come sunset at the end of this weekly Sabbath, at the end of this Sabbath today. And this telecast talks about the church that God raised up during the sixth era when we were one body, not scattered. We're still one body now, though we're scattered, and unfortunately, along with the scattering, God has had to see something he finds very distasteful, and that is we've become very divided. But if with our fruits we can please him so that there will be enough of us, he will want to gather up as he gathers those who meet the conditions of Luke 21, verse 36. I'm going to back the screen up here and let me pull this screen full forward. I'm sorry, Mr. Armstrong. I meant to bring this screen behind me over here full forward. Let's see, which button is that? This button. Here we go. Okay, now this verse from Luke 21, verse 36. Let's get the lower third out of the way so you can see the verse reference. It has two conditions for being accounted worthy to escape. They are watch and pray always, always meaning without ceasing. So that, and here's the reward if you do these two prerequisites, so that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong has explained that the next major event in prophecy will be the opening of the fifth seal. That's the time when those accounted worthy to escape are flown on two wings of a great eagle, Revelation 12:14, and chased by the devil, verse 16, who sends an army out against them, just like Pharaoh's army went out against ancient Israel as they crossed through the Red Sea. And as those accounted worthy to escape are fleeing from the armies surrounding Jerusalem, and the devil will have some of them and maybe more chase after those accounted worthy to escape, chasing 100,000, more than 100,000 people. It's going to have a huge army chasing. But as soon as we're told to head toward the mountains. The entrance to the mountains, unless you want to try to climb backward over mountains, is down across the Jordan River through the area of Petra. That's at the southern tip of Edom. And if you're listening to people who say, Petra's not mentioned in the Bible, well, just very nicely, kindly come back to them and say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, but Edom is mentioned in the Bible. And then see if they know. If they look like, well, so what? Then they don't know beans about geography, because Petra is at the southern tip of Edom, part of Edom, at its southernmost tip, and it is the entranceway into the main part of Edom. It gets wider after you get through the two rock walls of Petra, just like ancient Israel, once they crossed through the narrow passageway of the gelled-up walls of the Red Sea, then they were in that wide-open area on the other side. Well, once you get through the rock walls of Petra, out on the other side is the rest of Edom and all of Moab and all of Ammon. That whole tri-regional area is mentioned in Daniel 11, verses 40 and 41, as the area where those accounted worthy to escape. See which button brings that screen back over here. Let's see. Well, all right, we're going to Mr. Armstrong real quickly, but let's just get this verse back up on the screen again for a moment. Those accounted worthy to escape are I don't have the scripture up here for you, but if you look at Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 and 41, it tells you the only area that's protected from the beast, from the king of the north, during the Great Tribulation is described in verse 41 of Daniel 11 as that area of the land of the children of Ammon in the north, Moab in the middle, and Edom in the south. And being the only place the Bible describes as being protected from the king. I'm going to go ahead and slip Mr. Armstrong's lower third up here and have him ready to go, because as soon as I tell you this, we're going to go to Mr. Armstrong. Daniel 11 describes the only area protected from the king of the north, the beast, during the Great Tribulation. Where else is God going to take his people but to the only place that the beast can't get to, described in Daniel 11, and that is that area east of the Jordan River in the land now called Jordan, Ammon, Moab, Edom. Get into it through Petra. And that verse 16 of Revelation 12, God says, that army the devil has chasing, those accounted worthy to escape, he's going to open up a hole in the earth and swallow that army. And that's probably going to happen as they're trying to get through the walls of Petra, so that it parallels what happened to ancient Israel as Pharaoh's army was trying to get through the walls of the Red Sea. God let them all collapse. And so, the devil loses his army. Not just Pharaoh's army, but then the army of the future that's coming up after those accounted worthy to escape are escaping. God tells us in Revelation 12:16, the devil's going to lose that army, and then verse 17 tells us the devil is extremely angry. It calls him being in wrath because he lost his army, and those he was chasing and trying to capture get safely into the protected land, the wilderness God has provided for them. But there were some who were not accounted worthy to escape, because you see this says you got to be accounted worthy, and to be accounted worthy you got to do these two prerequisites. And I don't know the button to push for sure, but I have a button that lets me get that same screen up next to me. I think maybe it's this button right here. Oops. Let's see, I locked my screen there. I think it's this button right here. Okay. All right, I can get... Watch and pray are the conditions those who are accounted worthy to escape have to do. So even though Revelation 17 and verse 12, even though verse 17 of Revelation 12 says that the remnant, those who are left behind, were keeping God's commandments, there's more that people have to do in order to be accounted worthy. You got to be watching and praying, and this takes a huge amount of effort. And if you don't do this, you can maybe find yourself surprised that, hey, a bunch of people just went off to Jordan, chased by an army. The earth swallowed up that army, and those people got into Jordan. And here, I'm still here, wherever you are. And you've got a very angry devil who can't get to those accounted worthy to escape, but he can get to you. And he's going to have that beast make you work on the Sabbath and make you bow down to the image of the beast, or be killed, become a martyr, which is what Jesus Christ says those who are not accounted worthy to escape to make it have to do, Revelation 3:18. All right, I went further with that tonight than I actually really planned to. Of course, I did pray this morning, God, when I opened my mouth, please, you speak through it. So maybe with Pentecost, especially with Pentecost coming up, God maybe really wants you to know and get the message. You know, as Mr. Armstrong would say to us, brethren, 90% of you aren't getting it. And I would ask God, what is it we're not getting? And that message is that there is a great tribulation. All these things that shall come to pass mentioned here is that great tribulation that's being spoken of. All right, but I got Mr. Armstrong next to me here, and let's get a screenshot where we can just roll right into our end-time apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong, speaking tonight about the sixth era of the church that still exists, even though it's scattered. It still exists as the sixth era of the church. And when I want you to think, since the apostates who took over the church, well, they weren't apostates at the moment, or they weren't known as apostates when they took it over. They were handed the reins to the churchship, and they decided to try an apostasy. They tried to turn the truth into a lie, and they scattered. They helped create a great scattering of the church. But when Mr. Armstrong says, who or what is the worldwide Church of God, I want you to think about the sixth era of the church, since we've become scattered, and those who have the corporate ownership of the church name, of the corporate name of the sixth era of the church, as God settled it through Mr. Armstrong, after it first being the radio Church of God and then the worldwide Church of God as a corporate name. But Mr. Armstrong reminded us we're not members of the worldwide Church of God. That is a reference he was using here in 1984 to the Philadelphia era, the sixth era of the Church of God. So when he asks this question, or makes the statement, this is the worldwide Church of God, I want you to think of it as God's church in the sixth era. Okay? And let's go now to God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. What is the Church of God in the sixth era? What is the worldwide Church of God?
The program has been introduced as the Worldwide Church of God presents, and then follows the program. But just who and what is the Worldwide Church of God? I'd like to devote a little time on this particular program to tell you just what is the Worldwide Church of God. Jesus Christ said, as you find recorded in Matthew 16 and verse 18, I will build my church, and the gates of the grave shall not prevail against it. It would never die out. Now, he said church. He did not say, I will build many churches, denominations, sects, and many different groups calling themselves Christian. He said, I will build my church. Now, that church was founded in the year of 31 A.D., but within 2 years, persecution set in, and a false church began to rise up in the year of 33 A.D., calling itself Christian, using the name of Christ, calling itself Christian. By the year of 53 A.D., the Apostle Paul wrote to the churches up in Galatia, as you find in the first chapter of the book of Galatians, beginning with verse 6, I marvel that you are so soon turned from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. They had turned from the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, the gospel he preached, gospel means good news. He was a newscaster. He brought a message, and that message was news. It was news of the future. It was news of the kingdom of God. You read in the first chapter, Mark, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and how he came into Galilee preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God. That was the gospel that he preached. But soon men began preaching a gospel about Christ and not the gospel of Christ. The gospel of Christ was a message about the kingdom of God. So Paul said, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, there are many prophecies in the New Testament showing that false apostles, false teachers rose up, that they changed the original gospel altogether. The last two books in the New Testament, Jude and the book of Revelation, written in about 90 A.D., many, many years later, the last books written in the Bible, showed that, as Jude said, they should contend for the faith once delivered, because the churches had begun to turn away from the true message that Jesus brought. John showed how many had come, many false prophets had come, and that if they said, I know him, but they didn't keep God's commandments, they were liars, and the truth was not in him. So later on, the false church spread into hundreds of different denominations, sects, and groups, all calling themselves Christian and sort of going under the general name of traditional Christianity. But the true church did survive. These other churches were of the world. They grew big. The true church of God was persecuted. Jesus had called it the little flock. But it endured. And in the second and the third chapters of Revelation, Jesus Christ himself foretold 7 different successive epochs, periods of time, or eras in which the true church would exist and what would happen to it as a persecuted church, small in number, but the true church did survive. Now, today, that church still exists, and it has spread the gospel with all of the modern means of technological advancement. And today, our television department has recently prepared a very brief film to show in other countries describing the church and some of its activities of today. Today, it is worldwide. The gospel is going worldwide, all over the world, to multiple millions and millions of people. Well, here is just a little of that special film.
In today's tumultuous world, no message is more important than human survival. That is the message that the Worldwide Church of God has been proclaiming for over 50 years. It is a message of peace, the ultimate deliverance of mankind from impending nuclear annihilation. Herbert W. Armstrong, now in his early 90s, is Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God, Editor-in-Chief of the Plain Truth magazine, and founder and chairman of the Ambassador Foundation. The World Tomorrow began using satellite syndication in the United States as a means of distributing the telecast to various stations. At present, 61 stations receive the broadcast from Wold Satellite Television Network via the Telstar 301 satellite and record the program to be aired at the scheduled time. In addition to the regular English broadcast, The World Tomorrow is subtitled in 2 languages. French, aired on RTL, located in Luxembourg, and TMC in Monte Carlo, and most recently, Italian, broadcast on TMC Milan, which is cabled throughout northern Italy, including Rome. All literature offered on the program is given free of charge, without follow-up or request for contributions.
There's no subscription price to the Plain Truth. You wonder, how can we publish a magazine like that? And we don't ask the public for money. We don't beg for money on the air. You've never heard me ask for money. What we offer free. There are enough people that believe in what we're doing, that pay for it and finance it, and we don't have to beg for money over the air like you hear on almost every other program of this type on the air.
The advertising agency of BBDO International, Batten, Barton, Durston, and Osborne Incorporated, with its overseas offices, represents the Worldwide Church of God in purchasing media time and advertising space. BBDO's international network of agencies with over 100 offices in 36 countries and 72 cities is one of the largest in the world. The advertising agency interfaces with the Worldwide Church of God's 10 overseas offices. These offices serve members in 120 countries and territories. International members represent at least 20 languages. As Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God and founder and chairman of Ambassador Foundation, Mr. Armstrong has met with numerous heads of state, including the late President Anwar el-Sadat of Egypt, as well as Egypt's current president, Hosni Mubarak, President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel, King Hussein of Jordan, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain. He has also met with every Prime Minister of Japan since 1971, including Yasuhiro Nakasone. Internationally recognized for his humanitarian efforts on behalf of world peace, Herbert Armstrong has been called a builder of bridges between peoples everywhere. In recognition of his contributions to world peace, Mr. Armstrong has received numerous decorations, awards, and honorary doctorates. For example, he was honored by Emperor Hirohito with Japan's Order of the Sacred Treasure, the most prestigious award that can be bestowed upon a non-Japanese private citizen. In January 1984, Mr. Armstrong was decorated by Their Majesties King Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit of Thailand with an award equivalent to knighthood in recognition of his years of service to the Thai nation. Several years ago, Herbert Armstrong was highly honored by his longtime friend, the late King Leopold III of Belgium. After the armistice of World War I, the war that was to end all wars, King Leopold's father, King Albert, picked up a cannonball from a battlefield that had been the site of several wars through the centuries. From that iron cannonball, he commissioned 4 watch cases to be made, each completed with a fine jeweled movement. These watches were to be given to the 4 men whom he felt had contributed most to the cause of world peace. The first watch was given to Field Marshal Foch, Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies in World War I. The second watch was presented to General Pershing, Commander-in-Chief of the United States forces in Europe. And the third to George Clemenceau, Premier of France. Finding no one else he felt was qualified to receive the 4th watch, King Albert passed it on to his son. King Leopold presented that final watch to Herbert W. Armstrong. According to Mr. Armstrong, I feel it was the very highest honor the king could have paid anyone. Whatever contribution to world peace I may be making is not through war, but through education, teaching millions worldwide the way to peace. In his meetings with heads of state around the world, Herbert Armstrong explains the way of the Creator is the way of give, of outgoing concern for others, rather than this world's way of get. In addition, he addresses groups of distinguished businessmen and civic leaders. He has spoken before numerous Rotary clubs around the world, boldly proclaiming the good news of a coming peaceful and prosperous world tomorrow. The philanthropic arm of the Worldwide Church of God is represented by the Ambassador Foundation. Foundation projects are natural extensions of Mr. Armstrong's overseas visits with leaders of nations. These projects embrace a wide variety of cultural, educational, and humanitarian activities around the world. For example, in conjunction with Hebrew University, students from Ambassador College work during the summer months excavating various archaeological sites in Jerusalem. Through his mutual friendships with Japan and Israel, Herbert Armstrong has been able to assist Prince Mikasa in building the collection of artifacts at the Middle Eastern Culture Center in Tokyo. As a result of Mr. Armstrong's efforts, Dr. Joseph Aviram, director of the Institute of Archaeology at Hebrew University, presented several fine examples of ancient Israelite pottery. This museum, the only one of its kind in Japan, was founded by Prince Mikasa to enhance the Japanese people's knowledge and appreciation of Middle Eastern cultures. The foundation also helped support a special school in Amman, Jordan. The Bunyat Special Education Center, a personal project of Princess Sarvath of Jordan, provides vocational training for mentally handicapped children. On a recent trip to Amman, Mr. Armstrong was accompanied by the princess on a tour of the center's facilities. Projects around the world supported by the Ambassador Foundation provide students from Ambassador College the rare opportunity to serve others as well as develop new and enriching experiences. For example, through ACCEPT, A-C-E-P-T, the Ambassador College Educational Project in Thailand, specially trained students participated in a joint project with Wat Thai Temple of Los Angeles. The students were sent to northern Thailand to help and prepare Indo-Chinese refugees for their new lives once resettled in the Western world. The Foundation's cultural centerpiece is Ambassador Auditorium in Pasadena, California. The auditorium is regarded as one of the world's most beautiful and acoustically perfect performing arts centers. Many of the world's finest performers have graced the auditorium stage. Carlo Maria Giulini and the Vienna Symphony, Vladimir Horowitz, Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra, Luciano Pavarotti, the late Arthur Rubinstein, Renato Scotto, Beverly Sills, Joan Sutherland, Herbert von Karajan, and the Berlin Philharmonic. The Ambassador Auditorium is located on the award-winning campus of Ambassador College in Pasadena, California. 3 times, Ambassador has been recognized as America's most beautiful college campus. The college maintains 2 campuses, a 4-year institution in Pasadena, California, and a 2-year junior college in Big Sandy, Texas. The college places primary emphasis on education of the whole individual and not of the intellect alone. Ambassador College is a unique educational character-building institution. It teaches not only how to earn a living, but how to live. Ambassador students are taught the missing dimension in education, the underlying purpose and the real meaning of life, the worthwhile values, the basic laws of success. They are given individual attention in the development of character, culture, and personality. Undergraduate students come from a great variety of national, racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. The international student body encompasses diverse cultural heritages, representing over 20 nations, and provides a distinctive cosmopolitan flavor. The college is largely supported by the membership of the Worldwide Church of God, and has been empowered by the states of California and Texas to confer degrees. Major funding for the Plain Truth magazine, World Tomorrow broadcast, and Ambassador College is provided by the membership of the Worldwide Church of God. A specially designated fund contributed by the church members is used to help support the needy, widows, and orphans of the church, in keeping with the biblical principle of give. The independent auditing firm Arthur Anderson & Company annually audits the financial statements of the church, college, and foundation to provide an unbiased certification of financial integrity. The Worldwide Church of God has always been non-proselytizing and non-competitive. As a matter of principle, the church does not appeal for converts, solicit contributions from the public, offer anything for sale to the public, agitate movement to bring about any objectives, political or otherwise. The Worldwide Church of God practices Christianity as a way of life. The Creator's way of life demands an outgoing concern for the welfare of others equal to one's own self-concern. Herbert W. Armstrong believes in the principle of give, as opposed to the all too often practiced way of selfish get. Along with the members of the Worldwide Church of God, he is committed to sharing a message of hope with all of mankind. For this reason, the church is dedicated to an international effort to ultimately reach all peoples worldwide.
Now today, there are hundreds, as I said earlier, hundreds of sects and denominations, all calling themselves Christians, all calling themselves Christian or traditional Christianity. But where is the one true church that Jesus Christ himself founded? Now, I have prepared a very special booklet. It's only been offered, I believe, once before on this program. Where is the true church today? Where is the true church? I'd like to have you have a copy. I'd like to have you know some of the history of what happened from the time Jesus Christ started this church in 31 AD, what happened in that first century, in the second century, what has happened since, and what has happened today, and where is that one true church today after all these years of persecution and trial and everything that has gone on. Now, there's no cost, of course. We never ask for money over the air. There'll be no follow-up. This is Herbert W. Armstrong. Goodbye, friends.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, and thank you to those of you who are tuned in tonight for our Bible study this Friday night before or as part of the double Sabbath, back-to-back weekly Sabbath flowing right into the annual Sabbath at sunset at the end of this weekly Sabbath, becoming Pentecost for this pagan Roman year of 2021. All right, now that booklet Mr. Armstrong was offering at the end of the telecast here tonight. This is and asking the question, where is God's church today? That's probably the only book of all the booklets I can think of that Mr. Armstrong has written and offered, published, that may need at this moment to be rewritten. Because as Mr. Armstrong mentioned, all of the persecutions we've gone through and different things we've gone through, and this was while he was still alive, prior to us going through a great falling away, apostasy, and scattering. And so we're going to discuss that on Pentecost Day, maybe even a little bit tomorrow. I may give a teaser, a build-up for Pentecost. We'll have sermons by Mr. Armstrong on Pentecost Day, and we'll talk about where is God's true church today. Where is it really? Is it obviously, everybody knows it's no longer one body. And what if every Vanity Plate Church of God group that's out there printed their own version of that book? Where is God's true church today? What would it say? Well, of course, it's a given. It goes without saying. They're all going to say, well, it's over here where we are, doing what we're doing. Well, one thing that's, I think, sadly being overlooked, Mr. Armstrong made mention of how God opened doors for his church in the sixth era. And even though Mr. Armstrong is taking an RIP, resting in peace, he's taking a little temporary sleep, as others who have died are doing, until Christ returns. In some cases, Greg over in the UK believes God's going to resurrect Mr. Armstrong before Christ returns and have him be one of the two end-time witnesses. Greg, I will agree with you. That's certainly an option God has. I'm not going to go as far as you are going and saying that God's going to do it that way. But if he does do it that way, I'm going to say, yeah, Greg, I considered that possibility of what you said, so I'm not going to be overwhelmingly shocked or surprised if God does it that way. That is an option God has. But as to where God's church is today, many would be saying, well, yeah, most of them are overlooking the fact that God has opened up a brand new door since Mr. Armstrong's death. That's the door you're viewing on right now. That's this marvelous World Wide Web. We lost the worldwide Church of God, but now we have the World Wide Web, a new open door for the work that God did through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, through which God continues to do that work, and do it even more prolifically in a way, because never before the World Wide Web, even when Mr. Armstrong was alive, could you get Mr. Armstrong's radio broadcast, his telecast, his Bible studies, his sermons. Some of those you couldn't even have it, you didn't even have access to while Mr. Armstrong was alive. But let's say his radio broadcast and his telecast, you had to wait till it came on the radio, or came on television. You had to wait till it came on radio daily, or came on television weekly. And if you wanted a publication, even though you could call an 800 number for it, you still had to wait for the United States Postal Service to get it to you. And even a little bit, you had to wait for our own crews, which I did work on for a little while. I worked several places. I worked in the postal mailing department of the work for a while, helping box up your request, or box up or package up, and get them sent out to you. You had to wait for the mailing center of the work to pull that literature you asked for and get it in an envelope, get postage on it, get somebody to, drive it over to the postal center, and wait for the postal center to do their processing and get it out on their delivery trucks to your home. Now, you can take a little, one of these little small smartphone devices with internet access and just punch in a request in a URL entry for a Google search what are the possible searches you could do? There's a lot of search engines. Yahoo even offers one, and many others. You can use Start Page if you want to use the fancy one, private one. And within seconds after you hit the button to say, okay, I'm looking for this and for certain information, boom, you get hundreds of hits. You can scroll your finger and roll through just hundreds of different hits of possible answers to your question, and many of those are going to be those offering you publications by God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. And you can go to specific sites on which various people we have it on our webpage, on our library page. You've got access to many of the publications Mr. Armstrong wrote. And through our archive video page, you got access, and not only us, but others, just all over the World Wide Web. And even on these video services, you can find Mr. Armstrong's radio broadcasts, his telecast, even Bible studies and sermons. And in an instant, within seconds, within microseconds, after you hit the button on a search, boom, there the stuff is coming at you. You don't have to wait. You don't have to talk to somebody on the phone on an 800 number. You don't have to wait for the mail center to pull your literature and stick it on an envelope, put postage on it, get to the post office, and the post office finally get it off into your mailbox. It's just right there on your phone. And if you're using a desktop, it's on your big screen. If you're using one of them super big screens on your wall, boom, you can get what you're looking for. On this new open door, you can have it immediately. The work God did through his end-time apostle. And even though his end-time apostle is in the grave, God having caused all of these things to have been preserved and to still be available, in spite of what the apostasy did, you got to give one salute to them, where they put a lot of the videos we show here, they put them into the public domain. Thank you, dear God. So we don't have problems with that. Some of the music in some of them was licensed for broadcasting through BMI and other services, and the fees paid for the licensing for broadcasting. So once in a while on these various places where we preserve, if we show one of the telecasts, we get strikes or money claims for the music that was in these telecasts. So we let them have the money and say, okay, we're not on breeder, but God's opened that door and continue to make these things available through the World Wide Web, and more easily accessible than when Mr. Armstrong was alive. So nobody needs to be replicating the work God did through his end-time apostle. It's more available now than when Mr. Armstrong was alive. We're in this period of time where God is watching us to see what we are going to be doing. And are we going to be doing Luke 21, verse 36? Let's close with that. I'm going to punch the scriptures on the Bible display back to that very first scripture I had up there, which has that verse in it. And where do I have that screen that brings it over here? Not this one. I've still got that. I've still got the close of the broadcast up on that screen. I thought I had a button for that. Well, I can, oh, that's button number 10? No, it's this button over here. This one, Stephen, I think. Let's try this button here. Okay, there, we got it where I got it on this screen next to me here, and get the lower third out of the way. Here's where we need to put our focus, and with Pentecost coming up, it's still, this verse applies very much. The church God started on Pentecost AD 31, which is the church is not an organization, it's not a building. It is, as we'll go through those scriptures tomorrow from 1 Corinthians 12 and Romans 12, that talks about the church being one body but composed of many members. And so the members is the church. Brethren, that's you and that's me and those God has called to the spring harvest, to have God's Holy Spirit. And he's watching us to see if we're going to watch the 4 active seals and be praying always without ceasing about the people affected by the 4 seals. The first 4 seals of the 7 seals of Revelation are the only seals that are currently active. They are your horses, your colored horses, of the apocalypse, or apocalypse, the Greek word for revelation, the 4 horses of Revelation, your white horse of false religion, your red horse of war, rumors of war, world war, the uniting of Europe. The 3rd seal depicted by the black horse of famine, scarcity of food, and the 4th seal depicted by a pale horse with a rider on that horse named Death, alongside whom rides Hades, hell, the grave, with Jesus Christ in plain language in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, describing that the deadly activities of that 4th seal, primarily by loimus, meaning disease epidemics and pestilence and the plagues of Egypt. But he also said it would be death by seismic activity on the earth, commotions in the air, gale-force winds of all kind, commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic eruptions and wildfires and floods, any seismic type of activity. Christ also said there would be death by wild animals. That's part of the 4th seal. And that there would also be, he only mentioned it in Mark 13, verse 8, there would also be terake, meaning not your full-fledged great tribulation type of trouble, but there would be the beginning of sorrows type of trouble by mobs and seditions, causing death, but not the major death with martyrdom for keeping God's Sabbath and for failing to bow down before the image of the beast, as comes in a great way during the opening of the 5th seal, the next major event in prophecy being the opening of that seal, number 5, Great Tribulation. In the meantime, God is watching those whom he tells to be watching those 4 active seals, to see if we're watching and to see if we care. Do we really have God's Spirit and exercise it the way Jesus Christ did, where he cried for people in towns and cities when he saw the evil and the suffering they were going through? What about us? Do we care? Are we watching? Are we praying with that kind of care and watching always and praying about it? God wanting to see that in us so that we may be accounted worthy to escape the opening of the 5th seal, the next major event in prophecy. And it's, I'll tell you, in this Bible study, that 5th seal is ready to go. God's simply holding it up. Those 4 seals that have to become full before God lets the 5th seal open up. I mean, how much fuller is God going to let the activity of those 4 seals go? Brethren, I'll close tonight by asking you for a prayer that God will help me bring everything together that I need to bring together so we can get a program that helps do the watching. We called it World Watch. I did it for more than 7 or 8 years. And then God put me through some trials. I didn't maybe pass them all perfectly, but, God's still working with me on that. And And then we went through this coronavirus thing, which was an extremely unusual event and things. I'm kind of glad that the trial God put me through was during that time. And I probably need to let him know, okay, I'm willing to go through the struggle I went through to keep that program going 7 years. I mean, some of you wonder why I don't get back to you on the phone and stuff like that. Now, I did promise Jacob, I'll call him back tomorrow. Dane, Jacob, you can bet your boots after the service is over in the morning, after I've got everything indexed and up, I will keep my word and call you back. And I'll take a look at some of those things you asked me about Jacob related to how God describes himself in his word, so that you can see that, as one reference, Abba, Father, Abba, that means like, hey, Daddy, somebody really close to you and intimately loving you, and our Father does. I'm glad you asked that question tonight. That's something we should probably make sure we put some emphasis on during the weekly Sabbath service tomorrow, before the annual Pentecost service, of acknowledging, commemorating when God started the New Testament church, that's composed of many members, one body, one now scattered body, many members scattered all over the place. And we'll talk about how come some people are here and some people are there. I have an answer to you from that, from what some brethren gave me when Dan Listen and I were doing a traveling feast where we were live on the air every day from a different city, asking you to guess, see if you could guess where we were. And there's Dan pictured right there. He still needs prayer, as he says, for getting his weight and muscle adjusted back after having been ill with something that took his weight down to just a little over 100 pounds. Whew, he was thinner than here. Okay, let's call it a night, because I think we all need to get a good night's rest for this double Sabbath, and we'll plan to be back here. Hope you're invited to join us again in the morning. I'll try to be here. Everything's set, ready to go. We'll try to be here on time for our Sabbath service, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9:30 Central, 7:30 California. But you California people are welcome to watch it later from the archive, and it'll be available on cogtv.org from the archive video page, and from the archive of Facebook and YouTube as well. And let's see, 10:30 Eastern Time should be Daylight Savings Time. Should be, I forget how Daylight Savings Time works. It'll either be 2:30 or 3:30 p.m. in British Standard Time would make it 3:30 p.m. Still before sunset in the United Kingdom, as some of you have asked me to do. So I call it our service AM to the U.S., PM to the U.K. Brethren, thanks for joining me tonight, and please get a good night's sleep, and we'll look forward to you joining us again in the morning. Till tomorrow. Your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath, saying happy Sabbath and good night.
Bye.